Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Joel Kim. I'm part of the team at changeforce, and I'll be kicking things off before handing over to our speakers today. Couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's session is being recorded, so if you need to step away at any point, you'll have access to a full replay. We'll also be sharing the presentation deck along with any relevant resources or data we referenced during the session, so you'll have everything you need after the fact. If you have any questions as we go, please drop them in the comments and we'll make sure to get they get addressed. We want this to feel like a conversation, not a presentation. And now, today's session is called Mind the Gap, Shifting Managers from Knowing to Doing. And if you're here, chances are you felt the frustration of investing in leadership development and not seeing it show up in day-to-day managing behavior. That's exactly what we're getting into today. I'm thrilled to introduce you to two people who are going to take you through it. First, Robert Haddow Beaven. He is the co-founder and CEO of Octahedron and partner at changeforce. Rob has spent more than 20 years helping executives and organizations build a kind of leadership capacity that holds under pressure. As CEO of Octahedron and a partner at changeforce, his work focuses on translating behavioral science into practical systems that strengthens trust, culture, and team performance. He's advised leaders across many industries on the challenges that don't always show up in the data, but absolutely show up in the results. Next, we have Mica Vaipan, my apologies. She is the founder of Run Yourself and VP Product Tech and AI at changeforce. And Mica brings 15 years of experience spanning entrepreneurship, executive coaching, leadership development, mergers and acquisitions, product development, and AI. As a founder of Run Yourself, she has developed a scalable program backed by an AI-powered platform that enables leaders to strengthen their coaching skills and achieve a sustained behavior change. And now, as VP of Product and Tech and AI at changeforce, her work sits at the intersection of behavioral change, organization of performance, and AI, which means she will bring an interesting perspective to the conversation today. Now, with that said, I'll hand it over to Rob and Mica. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much, Joel. So I've spent a lot of my career inside organizations trying to improve leadership and culture. And I've never walked into an organization that didn't have leadership gaps. And I know I've had them myself. A company might say, hey, we empower people, but every decision still goes upstairs. We want managers to coach, but managers solve the problems for the employee. We value candor, but everyone waits until after the meeting to say what they really think. Or we want accountability, but no one wants to have the uncomfortable conversations. Those are the gaps. A leadership gap isn't necessarily hypocrisy. Often, people believe what they're saying. They generally want to coach rather than tell. They generally want to delegate rather than do it themselves. And they generally want to give better feedback rather than be short. Guess what? Monday morning happens. So the interesting question isn't whether your organization has a leadership gap. It does. The question is what you're doing to close them.
And this takes us what we'd really love to and welcome Estrella, Rachel, Surya. We'd love to hear from you. What are the biggest challenges that you're faced with that would enable us to really focus the conversation in that direction? So Rob has kindly put up a poll. We'd love for you to just share a little bit with us. What do you struggle with? Is it to get managers to show up to trainings? Is it to get managers to they do attend trainings, but little changes, or some things change, but they're not consistent, or you struggle with measuring leadership effectiveness or training effectiveness? Thank you. So it seems like we've got Some managers improve, but it's inconsistent, and we struggle to measure the effectiveness of what training delivers. Okay.
Right. So most companies have focused heavily on the first word, learning. We've gotten very good at delivering content, whether it's workshops, leadership academies, LMS systems, executive programming, right? Keynotes, books, competency models. And most of that is excellent. But what happens Tuesday? That's the issue. If it doesn't connect to a problem I'm actually facing, I'm probably not going to be using it. A manager dealing with a struggling employee doesn't need 14 leadership competencies. They need the conversation they're having this afternoon at 2 p.m. So knowing something is completely different from doing it, especially while another human being is sitting in front of you. So we can teach someone how to give feedback, how to coach, how to listen, even how to navigate conflict. But understanding a model while sitting in a workshop is extremely different than when using it when someone is defensive, emotional, or challenging, right? That's why practice really matters. So leadership behavior is closer to developing a muscle rather than passing a test, right? You don't attend a class on listening and all of a sudden become a great listener, right? You have to practice, get feedback, you try again. I've been around leadership development for a long time, and one of the things I've recently changed my mind about is how much content people actually need. Most managers don't need another 40 slides. They need more opportunities to practice the 5 things that matter the most. Mica, she's going to talk about those now.
Thank you. And I'm really going to draw on the experience that we've gathered in, as Joel mentioned. So I'm the founder of Run Yourself, and what we've built is a scalable program backed by an AI platform that helps managers strengthen their coaching skills. And what we've realized is ultimately content doesn't lead to behavior change. And with most soft skills, it's not often a knowledge problem, it's a behavior change problem. So or if there is a knowledge gap, that knowledge gap can be filled quite easily. And then how do you move from that knowledge to actually behavior change, or the doing part? And one of the things that I realized that there is a gap in, even in the training process, let alone the practice after the training, is that most training is content. Now, if you just deliver content without enabling people to really connect to their own experiences, then that content doesn't even go, I'd say, goes through 1 year, it comes through another year. That doesn't even go through that year. So we start with a quote from Galileo Galilei that says, and we can only teach people when we help them discover it within themselves. And really the purpose of when we run the training, and the purpose what we encourage managers to do when they're trying to teach somebody, is to help them connect whatever the content is with their own experiences. So to develop that awareness and to really not just know it, but feel it. And then almost immediately, I guess we start usually with some practice even ahead of introducing the content. Because by doing that, doing a demo or getting people to do something practical, they can find it within themselves and be like, okay, this is where I'm struggling, or this is where I'm finding the issue. And so then we can introduce the content in a more practical way. And they really relate to that, and we can interpret that content in a more practical way. Now, if we just stopped at the practice during the training, what research shows is that we'd only see a 10 to 15% success rate, i.e. only 10 to 15% of the managers who attend that training would actually change their behavior, because 10 to 15% of managers are naturally good at some of these soft skills. Now, if we want to really achieve sustained behavior change, there needs to be structured practice following that training. So what we ended up doing at Run Yourself is to have a program, a peer-to-peer coaching program that enables managers to really practice those coaching skills with the help of an AI platform that holds a mirror to them and actually gives them feedback in each one of these peer-to-peer coaching. So they have practice in a low stakes environment that enables them to really feel awkward, to do things that they wouldn't potentially take the risk in day-to-day high-risk conversations with their direct reports. And so that enables them to develop that muscle memory, and starts slowly and slowly seeping into their identity, and they start developing this coach identity. And this is how we see results. They start telling us around session 8, when they've coached 8 times somebody, they start saying, I'm doing this without thinking now. Like, I'm reflecting back, I'm asking open questions without having to really be intentional about it. So I'll pause there. And so that takes us to the next thing that we'd like to hear from you, is how much of your training is content versus reflection and practice. And this is really important. It's not just about it being content versus practice, but actually how much of it is also reflection, people really connecting it to their own experiences and then practicing. And by the way, if it is a lot of it is content, I wouldn't blame you. Usually what I've seen is, and when it's because of lack of time, we're told sometimes, we can't give managers more than 60 minutes to train them. And what can you achieve in 60 minutes? You're trying to deliver that content. And there's limited, I guess, scope or opportunity for practice.
Thanks, Mica. So don't make telling sound like bad leadership, right? Managers tell people what to do because it works, at least in the short term. So someone walks into your office with a problem, you know the answer. You say, here's what I would do. 30 seconds later, they're gone. Problem solved. Manager feels useful, employee feels supported, work keeps moving. So why wouldn't we continue to do this? So I'd offer that's because we don't just solve our problem today, we're actually possibly creating a different problem for the future. The employee didn't have the opportunity to solve it for themselves. And tomorrow they come back. Eventually the manager will say, why does everyone come to me for everything? There's the irony. Sometimes we accidentally train people to depend on us. Early in my career, I thought part of my value as a leader was having all the answers. Someone brought me a problem, I solved it, and I got rewarded for that. What took me longer to understand was that every time I solved something for someone else, I was taking away an opportunity for them to build their own muscles at solving problems. So the shift is not to stop giving answers. It's to don't make the answer your first move, right? So try like, what do you think? Or what have you tried? Or what options do you see? Maybe even, what would you do if I weren't here? That extra 2 minutes might feel inefficient today, but it's going to really help you build capacity for tomorrow.
If I may just add quickly something to that,
Please.
Rob. One of the things that I found really insightful is in psychology, there's something called transactional analysis. And the idea is that at each point in time, we're in one of 3 ego states. We're either child, parent, or adult. And so very frequently what I see in that manager to direct report relationship is that parent to child. And what this theory tells us is that how we treat somebody, that's how they will behave back. So you can bring on board one of the most skilled people, but if we treat them like children, they will behave and they will respond like children. And so how do we break this? Ultimately, how do we break this pattern to bring the manager and the direct report into an adult to adult conversation? So ultimately, it's easy to default into parent to child, and it's comfortable for both. And that's why it stays. It's very stable, but it's not what helps the organization achieve the result that they need to achieve. So that takes us to our breakout discussion. Given the number of people that we've got, perhaps we can just open the room and have a discussion here as opposed to do a breakout room. But what we'd like to hear from you is just really open it to the room and think about a training that you've experienced. Let's start with one that you've experienced and you were really energized by it, but never really actually applied the learning or applied limited learnings. And we'd love for you to reflect, what got in the way? If that doesn't kind of come to mind, you might want to think, what's the training that you delivered, perhaps, and where you didn't see a lot of results, especially given the poll that we did at the beginning, where you said you are struggling to see it's limited, it's inconsistent results. What gets in the way?
So I think a lot of what you guys have both said already really resonates for me is that I've been in, leadership trainings, if you will, and kind of coming back to the office, it's kind of the falling back into the demands of your present role make it really difficult to apply a lot of the new ideas that you learned. And then secondly, what Robert was talking about with being face to face with somebody with emotions and making facial expressions and reactions to the things that you're trying, even when you're trying to implement the ideas you learned in that training. I
Yeah.
think those are the two most identifiable things that got in the way, if you will.
So falling back to the demands of your current role, you say like what I'm reading in between the lines is also a fast-paced environment. So you've got a lot on. It's it's almost like you fall back into the usual habits, or you just don't have that headspace to be
Yeah,
very
that's exactly right.
deliberate about changing behaviors.
Yeah, it's
Um,
when you have limited bandwidth, I think
yeah.
you take on the tasks that you know, and the tasks
Mm.
that you don't know are much harder.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also, when we all have limited bandwidth, like I know when I feel overwhelmed, the first thing that I lose is empathy or anything new that any being intentional about anything. You kind of go into that autopilot survival mode. So it's interesting that you mentioning that. And then, as you say, being face to face with emotions, like it's hard at that point to think, oh, what was the theory that was shared with me in that training program?
Yeah, I think it's less for me about remembering what the theory was as it is essentially delivering criticism, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rob, what are your thoughts?
I think, and I know you and I have talked about this before, it's kind of like when you look at athletes, right? They're not training once a quarter or once a year. They're training on an ongoing basis. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of focus on how we measure different pieces within the organization. And I think that measuring people on an engagement survey once a year that's not anonymous, right? At best, it's confidential and takes a lot of time. And most employees don't see any action come out of it, right? So it's frustrating. So it's kind of like when we look at like the mission, the vision, and value statements of organizations, it can't just be words, it has to be actual actions. And I think that's where leaders at any part of the organization really need to live through that and create the opportunity to be able to slow down and grab that extra 30 or 60 seconds to ask questions, right? Be curious, right? One of the an author I love is Richard Gerver, out of the UK, and he actually putting out a book this fall about being curious. And I think we're moving away from that, especially when we have technology being involved, right? As we're coaching people, right? Like when you're talking about run yourself, right? It's not about this is what you do. It's about being curious about how could I approach something differently. And I think to your point, we work too fast. And to what Mike was saying is, you go back to your desk, and what you were saying, we get back into that. This is the way I've always done it mode, so it's more comfortable than being uncomfortable. So one of the things I would offer is that being a true leader is not about being comfortable. It's about being comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And I think that's what we really need to focus on when we're working with our leaders and giving them opportunities to practice and give feedback that's not around shame or blame, but about empowering people.
Mm, thank you, Rob. And I may also think about ultimately, I've personally kind of hands-on trained hundreds of managers, and being there and experiencing their frustrations and their challenges. Um, they are humans after all, and I know we can ask them and say, hey, like we want you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, but they have so many demands and they have individual contributor responsibilities and so on. And I think going back to the what you mentioned about the athletes, right, and how they train, I always kind of come back to that and think that they train in low stakes environments. Not they're not coming up with new techniques. If we think about soccer, they're not coming up with new techniques while they're competing in ultimately live competition in a match. They're doing all of that in practice where they can get things wrong. And what happens with most trainings today is we give them the training, an hour or 90 minutes, whatever it is, and then we say, now go practice in your day to day. But that's just not how the brain works, right? We need that. any skills that we think. We need that low stakes environment to be able to get it wrong. And so how do we create that low stakes environment? And I think this is where the biggest lesson that I've learned from building Run Yourself is that in the absence of that practice, even though you open people's eyes initially with, we do half a day training and everybody's like, wow, that's what I want to do. I'm going to go and do it. In the absence of then creating almost like a habit for practice in a low stakes environment, no, the direct reports, we actually stop them. We tell them, don't start practicing with your direct reports until you've done at least three practice sessions, 3 peer-to-peer coaching sessions where you coach and where you get coached. And during this time, you develop that muscle memory that reduces the discomfort and reduces the, I guess, it just makes you feel much more comfortable because you've already done it. You're more likely to do it in those higher stakes situations. So I think if we approach it and what's actually realistic to expect from people, and usually what we see from companies who work with us, they will say, this is the longest program that we've run, because it takes anywhere from 9 months to a year. And that's why we're seeing this feedback from people saying that it's actually changed their behaviors, changed how they interact, not just at work, but in their families, with their friends, and so on. And it feels to me the lack of time is what gets in the way very frequently to actually have very effective training programs that lead to that behavior change and that really, I guess, enable that behavior change in managers before we ask them to change behaviors in their direct reports.
So we're going to jump into the 3 circles. So, I want you to kind of diagnose your current system, not your managers, right? And there's an important differentiator there, right? Because we're very quick to say our managers aren't using what we taught them, right? But looking at the environment we built around them, we really shouldn't be saying that, because as we kind of talk through, right, the first circle is training. So most organizations do super good here. Like they do a good job at, like, what do they have for training, right? How much leadership training do they provide, right? And most of them will have a lot. They'll have programs, they'll have courses, they'll have content, frameworks, right, that is customized to them, right? Once we move to the second piece, which is practice, right? How often do managers actually practice the behavior, right? Not learn about difficult conversations, but have a difficult conversation, practice a difficult conversation, get feedback, right? And then trying again. That number suddenly drops. And then finally, measurement, right? What leadership behaviors are actually measuring, right? Not the engagement surveys that we talked about earlier, where we're doing this once a year, right? Or even if we do it kind of a pulse check halfway through, right? Not whether someone completed the training, or, what I've seen all the time and I've been part of is doing a survey. Hey, how was this training? Oh, the training was amazing, right? It's about the behavior. Are managers asking more questions? Are teams speaking candidly? Are people delegating differently? Is trust improving? And then we're surprised when behavior doesn't change. One of the things I've become convinced over the years is that if something matters to the organization, eventually we find a way to measure it. Revenue, margin, customer retention, quality and safety, right? But leadership behavior often gets treated differently. We train it, we talk about it, and then we hope. Guess what? Hope isn't a behavior change strategy, right? So if you're able to, I know not everyone's able to drop in the numbers in the chat, right? No explanation, right? And what you'll see is most organizations we work with, most of our clients come in at 9, 2, 1. And that's why we're here today.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I think what will be good is just having reflected on some of these challenges. We'd love for you to perhaps just think about what's one thing that you're taking away from today. What did you realize today? And it might be something you already knew, but it's just shaped it clearer, and made it clearer in your mind. And what could you do differently tomorrow? Thank you. for joining us. I know it was a small group, but it was really interesting to hear your challenges. Rob, I'll hand over to you to close it.
Sure. So we started today talking about how every organization has leadership gaps, right? And those gaps don't close in webinars, right? They close tomorrow. And the conversations we handle differently, the questions we ask instead of giving the answer, the feedback you stop avoiding, right, Mike? The decision you let someone else make, the moment you listen for another 30 seconds. We're deliberately ending this webinar differently. We don't want you leaving here with like 6 or 7 ideas, because that would actually reinforce the problem we've spent this hour talking about. I'd rather you leave with one decision. Leadership development isn't about collecting ideas. It's about changing behavior. So tomorrow, do the thing you just wrote down. And if everyone here does that one thing differently, then this hour was worth it. Thank you so much for joining us.